What's up, guys? It's Lexi. So this week we talked about the civil rights movement, but specifically how it is taught in schools, or how it's taught and how the public views it. So the last couple months I've been doing a lot of research and I've had the opportunity to be educated about the plight of people of color in America, because it just wasn't taught like to me in high school that way. It's taught in a very whitewashed way. So this class specifically, and as well as a class I'm taking called Conservation Across Culture, they've both been really enlightening and showing me how just how history and how we're taught it in school is very different than what actually happened. We're taught a very whitewashed and sugar-coated version, and that's just not at all how it is. And so this lack of knowledge in the public eye can be tied to the ascension narrative, as we talked about in this week's videos. And this is seen in the civil rights movement. That is just all throughout it. So the ascension narrative, as we talked about it, it makes it seem that, you know, we had a point here and we progressively went up and got to an end point, and whoop-de-doo, like fixed racism, all is well. But obviously that's just not true. But this idea made possible systemic racism and institutional racism to carry on in America after like the 60s, and it's still very present today and is an issue that needs to be addressed. And so a good quote from the book about this actually is on page 147 in The View from the Trenches by Charles M. Payne. Sorry, I should have had it open. It's just that first paragraph there in the middle. It says, when Americans speak of the civil rights movement, they're unlikely to be thinking of Harry T. Moore or A. Philip Randolph, Septima Clark, Ella Baker, J.R. Delane, or Fred Shuttlesworth. They and the struggles they represent are not a part of American history as it is normally taught with its streamlined, homogenized version of the movement. Saying that most Americans have been raised on a whitewashed version of movement history is more than a bad pun. And I just completely agree with that. And it's really been made clear to me just the last couple months with emphasis of the Black Lives Matter movement, with the murder of George Floyd. And that's actually the current event I wanted to talk about, was the Black Lives Matter movement. So specifically in it, I want to tie it back to current news kind of here in Pocatello. So back in June, I think end of May, June, that's when Pocatello was organizing some marches and I had the opportunity to participate in those. And as those were being talked about and the word was being spread on social media, I saw a lot of people saying that like, oh, we don't have racism here in Pocatello, or, you know, like we don't have corrupt cops here in Pocatello. And I linked a Facebook post by Local News 8 that's from Blackout Tuesday, and just the caption is, "Are you participating in Blackout Tuesday?" And it links to an article that discusses what that is more, and what it means. And I've linked another article by NPR about Blackout Tuesday. That's the music industry side of it and their involvement in it. But going back to that idea, sorry, I have a lot of tabs open, of people not thinking it exists here. If you just go through the comments section on the Facebook post is what I wanted to point out. That just really proves how we do have racism here in Idaho and in Pocatello. And if you just look at the history of Idaho, you'll just see it all throughout it, as you will with the history of all of the United States. But it's just very arrogant, and it completely disregards the experiences of people of color in our community, by saying that, you know, we don't have racism in Pocatello. But that idea is just kind of taught, and it's very ingrained in our system and in our education systems. And that's just what has allowed institutional and systemic racism to flourish and be present everywhere in America, not just in the South, as it kind of seems. So going with that, just a real quick note, today is Tuesday and it is voter registration day, and back in the 60s, as we learned about, voter rights was a big part of their movement, and it was very important now, and it's still very important, And I would encourage you all to register to vote and do some research and be an educated voter. But moving on to my question for you guys. So what are some things that you think we can do as a society now to make sure that what we are experiencing and living through isn't erased or whitewashed in future history books? And just something I thought of and I've seen in the news recently, and I'll send a link to, is the 1619 movement. And it's just a woman, sorry, I forget her name, but it's this movement to teach a less whitewashed version of history, and I think that's a good start for sure, but I'd like to hear what you guys have to say.